In this video, I'm going to be talking about the alleged Aimbot clip that you've probably seen floating around if you've been online in the last few days, and I'll be recreating a few different types of Aimbot that might explain what's going on in this clip, or maybe not. And this topic overlaps a few interests of mine, one being biomechanics and emulating human movement, and also aim training. So the video you're seeing now is to give myself a little bit of credibility on this topic. And not because I think I'm good at aiming, but because what you're seeing now is completely automated with no human input. And I'm mainly including this for the benefit of the people that were telling me I don't know what aimbots are. But enough about me spending too much time arguing with nerds. Let's go on to the video. So this is the main clip that people had an issue with. And you can see it looks pretty weird. Let's watch that again in slow motion. We've got an instant snap to a rock, and the enemy happens to be behind it. And then some weird movement after the fact as well. So aimbots tend to check if something is visible before aiming at it. It helps things to look more legitimate, and it avoids wasting time aiming at targets that aren't available. In its simplest form, it just draws a line between the player's camera and the target, and if that path is blocked, it won't consider that as a potential target to aim at. But this is a specific feature that needs adding in, so let's just assume that this cheat didn't have that feature at all, or she decided to turn it off because she wanted to go for more clips. The next missing feature that we have to gloss over is a little bit harder to accept. So most aimbots would have some kind of angle limit where they won't consider targets that are outside of this range. And you can visualize this as some kind of smaller FOV within your actual field of view. Or a slightly more complex example where the FOV is dynamic, so it's scaled based on the distance to the target. And a way to visualize this is to imagine that if you put your crosshair into this region, then this target can be aimed at. And we can see from the original clip that it's basically uncapped. You can see that it's at least a 90-degree flick. But the game was only available for a few days, so let's assume that the cheat developer didn't have the time to figure out the formula to limit the angle range. And they certainly didn't have the time for the 8 months of research and development to figure out how to do dynamic scaling of the field of view. So because they didn't crack that enigma, they just left out the feature entirely. Okay. So here's what we'd expect that to look like, given that at any time there's probably at least 20 enemies available. Because we're not limiting by the angle or whether or not the enemy is visible, we're just looking for any alive enemy that's on the server at the time. But they don't have to be using it constantly. Maybe it's just when they shoot, or when they aim down sights, or when they press an aim key. If that's the case, one of two things can happen. Either they hold it down slightly too long, and it locks onto the target, or they don't hold it down long enough and the aim will fall short. But let's assume that the cheat developer that couldn't figure out angle limits or visibility checks came up with a brand new solution. They will take the angle between their current crosshair and the target, and then divide that by how many frames it is until they want to hit that target. And each frame they'll move by that amount. So let's say they start off with aiming to reach the target in 4 frames, they divide the angle into 4 and move by a quarter. And then the next frame, it's only 3 frames left, so they divide it by 3 and move by a third. And then there's only 2 frames left, so they move by a half. And then there's only 1 frame left, so they just go straight to the target. And at this point, they've reached the target, so the aim stops entirely. So we get the quick flick and the instant stop, which doesn't lock on or track the enemy. This would still be aiming at the wrong target half of the time, even if it was prioritizing by crosshair distance or player-to-player distance or any combination. But maybe it doesn't have to be so specific and convoluted. Maybe it's just a subtle aimbot that does have an angle limit, and it's simply helping out land on the target. It would certainly make it easier for people to flick and land on target as long as they could get somewhere nearby, and the aimbot is just helping the accuracy. There's 2 problems here though. Nobody's accusing her of using a subtle aimbot. They think the macro flick to the rock is cheated. Not just that it's subtly too accurate. And the second problem is, let's look at the accuracy here. Is it really that accurate? After the initial flick, there's an adjustment made, and even then, with the adjustment, the enemy is still actually quite a lot lower than the crosshair. And this initial flick actually seems to land quite far to the left of where we can assume the enemy to be. But now you may be wondering, could an aimbot be made to intentionally miss a target? Yes, and it may explain this weird snap, which is obviously just a mouse reset since it points to absolutely no one. But if she's playing with an aimbot that is actively sabotaging her aim to make the game more challenging, would you really care? Here's another theory, which actually explains all aspects. So the initial flick is human, and she decides to aim towards this spot because she knows there's no enemy on screen over here, or in the direction where she just came from. And also it's the direction that she's looking at the very start of the clip before the first kill. and the aiming into the rock instead of the edge of it was just some slight overshoot. But that leaves two things left to explain: the reaction time and coming to a dead stop with a flick. As for the reaction time, with a predictable TTK, you don't actually need to react, you just anticipate the timing of the kill. If you watch anyone playing a target switching aim scenario, you will see that they switch from one to the next pretty much on the frame that the target dies. This isn't a reaction, this is just a prediction. And coming to a dead stop from a flick, well, I'll be thrown out of the magic circle for revealing this, but this is just using the dark arts of lifting the mouse off the pad. Go into any game of your choice and try to spin around continuously as fast as you can. You'll naturally lift off and reset the mouse at the peak of the movement, causing it to stop instantly from a high speed. And if you practice this, you can do it with some degree of accuracy. There's aim training scenarios specifically targeting this technique. So I've presented both sides. It's either the world's most convoluted aimbot, which has its own built-in self-sabotaging anti-aim, or just someone who has good aim and is going for flashy clips. If you're still unsure, watch the livestream handcam VODs where you'll see unedited attempts, including the times where it doesn't work out. And let me know if you want to see any more videos on or around the topic of aiming, and thanks for watching.